So what is it that a legal system needs to provide in order to be seen as fair and just and consistent and treating all people the same? That's really the question that we're going to address to begin with here. And so the first question really is, why do we even need a formal legal system? After all, we could just have people flip a coin in order to resolve disputes that they might have. And in a sense, that would be fair, right? That would be a system that isn't rigged at any rate. But we don't think of that as a fair system because it feels arbitrary and untied to the merits of the particular legal dispute that might be going on. So we need to figure out, when we're doing a legal system, when we're designing a system, we need to figure out how to make it fair and how to make it consistent. So we want to treat all people the same. And so we don't want a certain sort of justice for some groups and a different sort of justice for others. So we need it to be fair and we need it to be consistent. And of course we need to provide order. We need to have a system that people would recognize as orderly. So all legal systems have to deal with these kinds of questions. And so now I just want to make a couple of distinctions between legal systems that exist in the world that are relevant to understanding the US legal system. And one of them is the difference between the civil law and the common law. Okay, so the civil law system, which is used in Europe and frankly much of the rest of the world, is a system of code-based law. That means the legislature creates a very, very detailed code, and those provisions are the law. And usually the statutes are incredibly detailed and go into kind of minute subcategories to try to cover every possible scenario that the legislature can think of. Now the US and the United Kingdom and Australia use case-based law. Common law is what it's referred to. And the idea here is that the legislature can create statutes, but the statutes generally are broader principles, and it devolves to judges to actually make case-by-case decisions that have precedential value, which we'll talk about in a minute, and that then shape the law and really create the law over time. So in common law systems, judicial decisions have the force of law, and they actually create law over case after case after case. In code-based civil law systems, judges still make decisions, but they're generally shorter, and they're built only on the legislative statutes. They don't elaborate on them and build law in quite the same way. Now, another distinction that we can make in a legal system is between substantive and procedural law. And there's some overlap between the two, but if you think about procedural law, that might be the law that tells you what court to go to, or if you have a dispute, what state you can litigate in, or how many witnesses you can call at trial, the roles of the judge and the jury. There's all kinds of procedures that you have to go through, whether you get an appeal and so forth. The procedures that you have to go through when you're filing your suit and how it gets resolved procedurally. Substantive law, obviously, is the opposite. So substantive law, we look at the merits of the dispute. The merits of the dispute might be who it is that has the better argument on the actual legal rules that are going to determine whether you're liable or whether you're not liable, whether you're responsible, whether you're not responsible, and so forth. Another distinction we can make is the idea of stare decisis and precedent. Now, this is an important topic specifically in common law systems. So in common law systems, the judge makes a judgment, and the question is, what does that judgment mean in the next case, the next dispute that might come up? And so stare decisis says that once a court decides something, they're not going to go back and revisit that particular issue without a very, very strong reason for doing so. Courts can sometimes overrule prior decisions, but they really do it quite reluctantly because they're worried about this issue of consistency and fairness, and they don't want to treat different people differently. So it would take a major change to the legal environment or to the culture for a court to go back and undo stare decisis and actually rule something different on the precise legal issue. Now, that's a little different from precedent. Precedent says a court has decided one issue a particular way. We're not going to overrule that particular issue because of stare decisis, but we are going to look at that case to divine principles that will then govern the next case. Because maybe the next case has slightly different facts or a slightly different scenario. And so we want to see, do the principles of the first case suggest a way of resolving the second suit? They don't necessarily tell you how to resolve the second suit, but they may suggest it. And so courts in a common law system where judges are building case after case after case to create the law will look back to precedent, will look back to decisions that they've reached in the past, and they will use that as a guide for future cases. And all of this is designed to make sure that we have consistency and predictability. So both the principle of stare decisis and the principle of precedent is there so that we can make sure that a court will not decide a case based on their whim or based on the particular parties before them, but will actually use the principles that they've articulated in the past. They won't just overrule precedent without a very, very good reason, and they will use that precedent to decide the next case.